Welcome to Between Sundays, a podcast from Union Grove Baptist Church where we take the truths we talk about on Sunday and bring them into everyday life. Because faith isn't just for one day of the week, it's for all of them. I'm your host, David Jane, and each episode we'll sit down with our pastors to unpack how God's Word meets us right where we are, at work, at home, in our relationships, and in the real stuff of life. Thanks for joining us as we learn how to live out our faith between Sundays. All right, guys, welcome to UG Between Sundays, the podcast where we get to dive deeper from what we learned on Sunday morning and make some practical steps to apply this stuff to our week between Sundays. So I'm David Jane, joined by everybody this week. A loaded episode for a loaded message on Sunday. It was the commandment, honor your parents. So as we kind of start, we're going to go one by one, kind of just explain how we grew up, contrasting that with the kids we've raised or are raising, and just start with you.
Okay. All right. So I would say my parents were kind of in the middle. Like there were certain things that they decided, I guess, to be strict on, and they were very united in that, and then also equally united in the things that they were, I wouldn't say like allowed me to push back on, but allowed me to like question some things to the point of, hey, is this really what we should be doing just because their parents asked them to do it, or maybe a church or a school or something was an influence in that. I did go to a very strict like Christian school growing up, and so that it helped because it taught me along with my parents like the discipline of it all, and that it's important to not like just do things because you're supposed to do them, but to maybe kind of ask questions, and then ultimately it kind of reveals your heart of why you're doing those things. And that's what we've allowed with our kids. So we've got kids from 22 all the way down to 10, and as they've kind of come through the house, and some obviously are still in the house, we do, like, of course, we have rules that Shanna and I are like united on, but then we also do allow them to like ask some questions, because the way we kind of see it is we don't want them necessarily, or we don't want to necessarily teach them what to think, but we want to teach them how to think. And so if part of that process, when they're in the safe environment of the home, if part of that process is learning how to do that, and I think it is, then what a better place to do that when it's safe, and when you can push back, and when you can be encouraged all at the same time. And then also not just push back because you maybe emotionally don't feel like it's okay and you just don't want to do it, but more of like, hey, what's really right and wrong here, or is there some gray area? How do we figure that out together? Mm-hmm. And then also you kind of get a gauge for how far is too far to push. And like, oh, I've crossed the line. I can see that on mom and dad's faces. And so I need to kind of take cues from that, not just for my relationship with them, but friends, other family members, teammates. Like it just applies to so many things when you're talking about authority.
Yeah, cool. So I'll go, and then we'll go in order kind of here. I was born in the late 70s. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a little younger than that. But wow. So I grew up in the 90s, early 2000s, and kind of the age of technology. Like I didn't have a cell phone until I was 16. So there's a lot of difference kind of to me. I know there's difference to people older than me than when they grew up, but in a Christian household, my parents both worked at the school that I went to, K through 12. So since they worked at the school, I feel like there were some things that were a little bit more strict in that regard. My teachers could go tell my parents stuff before I even knew I did anything wrong, I guess. Growing up then, went to Christian school for college, met my wife there. Now we have 2 kids, 7 and 3. You know, there's not like a ton of stuff we want to do differently than how I grew up. Just some different boundaries that we've worked out between us and what we're comfortable with. The main thing I think is just the technology, because things are on demand. And it was funny like explaining to my daughter what an ad was, because she was like, what is it? Like, we grew up with commercials, and now it's kind of come full circle with advertisements, but like the limited screen time that the kids have. I remember the first time she was just like, what is this? Like, for whatever reason, several years ago, there weren't as many advertisements, but that was just something funny I thought of. But yeah, doing it as good as we can with 7 and 3-year-old. This is our first year of homeschooling, so we're giving that a shot. And yep, here we go. All right.
I actually think we should dive into David's upbringing because your parents are the only parents represented that attend our church.
Oh,
And so I think that'd be a fun
yeah.
conversation at some
Sure.
point. But
Bringing them online.
right, we should have
Man.
had them sitting here with
Yeah.
us. That would have been awesome. So I grew up in a Christian household, Christian family. I joke all the time that I had a very strict upbringing. I did in some ways, but I was kind of like you in the way that you described it, David. Like little bit balanced. Like they were real strict on some things I could and couldn't do, but then also like pretty chill about some things that other parents were really strict about. Like if they knew who I was with, they didn't care if I was out till like 1 in the morning or anything like that when I was in high school, as long as they just knew who I was with. And so they would let me do things, go off with friends all the time, driving different things when I got my license. And as long as they kind of knew where I was and I checked in, they were pretty chill. But then it was like we were so strict on things like like technology is a big change in all of our environments because growing up we didn't have that. And so like video games, I couldn't play video games very often. I could a little bit, but not much. I couldn't go to movie theaters. There's a lot of movies I couldn't listen to, a lot of music choices I couldn't listen to. So they were strict on things like that, like my influences, but then great about other things. And so I mean that's kind of how I was raised. So like we're duplicating a lot of things that my parents did. Growing up, and we'll dive into some specifics of what that looked like or whatever. I grew up, I got in trouble some at school. Nothing crazy. I just like to talk and run my mouth. And so it's changed, okay?
Now you get paid to do it.
Positive, exactly. And so I did that all the time and it always sent me to the principal's office or whatever. And one thing that I think has changed since when I was growing up across the board in parents today, because we have a Christian school, my parents always seem to side with my authority figure. Like,
Yeah.
it just every time. And sometimes I felt like I had a legitimate case. Okay. I was like, come on. This is my chance to really prove the teacher wrong or prove my authority wrong or prove the youth leader wrong or whatever. I don't remember one time my parents ever sided with me. And that frustrated me at the time. I mean, I was frustrated. I resented them for it at the time. But it really taught me the value of respecting authority. And I think over, time, generations, that is probably, in my perception, one of the biggest ways parenting has changed in the last 40 years is that. So, but yeah. So,
For me, I'm different in that I grew up in a broken home. Dad left when I was 7. My brothers were 4 and 3. So it was mom and then grandparents and uncles, who sort of filled the gap in for me. Mom was about 5'7", but I knew better to mess with mom. I remember one time as a kid, I got in a bad habit of saying "shut up," and even telling my grandma. And then one time we were doing it, mom said something to me, and I said "shut up," and it's like the eyes of death was upon me, and I struck that word. To this day, I still have a hard time saying that word "shut up." I still hardly ever say it. But mom gave some freedom, but when she towed the line, you towed the line. And I could remember growing up, of course, I'm older than all of y'all, but I graduated from high school in 81. But there was only one time in all my years that mom ever took up for me. Every other time, I didn't dare tell her I got in trouble at school, because if I got in trouble at school, I was getting it again at home. So I didn't dare tell her, I didn't mention it. But one time the principal said something and I took him for what he said, and then he expelled me for 3 days. And that's the only time mama ever, chose that. So when me and Michelle were raising our twin boys, I'm sort of like what your mom and dad did. I was always there at the church because they went to Union Grove. I knew about it before they ever got home. And so they would get frustrated at me and say, "You always take the teacher's side." I said, "Well, just because probably another time you got by with it and this time you didn't." And not every situation were they always wrong, but I saw how the parents, it was even back in my boys' years where the kid was never wrong. The authority was always wrong. And I just went the other way, maybe a little too much. but hopefully, like Pastor said, it caused them to respect authority, and that's what I wanted to do. Because in my day and age, you respected police, you respected those who had authority, the teachers, the principals. I mean, goodness, I could go back then, Mr. Steinhaus, and he made me nervous to go in his office, and I wasn't even. We worked together, so you respect authority, but it taught me a valuable lesson about respecting authority, and that's what we tried to teach our boys as well.
Nice. Okay, so we did have one question mailed in, and there's not a ton of questions today. I feel like we're going to kind of hit some good, heavy topics and just offer different perspectives. So this is kind of, we'll follow the same order here, but this question was emailed in from one of our people. Part of the commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, is to obey them. Does or when does the obey aspect of this commandment no longer apply to a person? So different stages of life, like when they turn 18, when they move out of their parents' house, when they get married, or some other point in a person's life, or never.
Okay.
Is this a teenager asking this?
when can I stop obeying you? Yeah. No, I would say like when they move out of the house, like maybe when you like what makes sense to me is as long as you're under our house, you're under our rules, and that could be like a curfew thing. That could, well, I guess it's all the above, whether it's a curfew thing or if it's whether just like taking care of the stuff that you have. Obviously, you hope you've built certain habits and rhythms in their life to where they're gonna respect everybody at all times. But I think there are certain things that maybe just have kind of an end, I guess, when it comes to obedience and everything that goes along with specific house rules.
So I have kind of like a specific story that I'd like to share just briefly. This has to do with kind of my parents, their thoughts when they shared this with me. It was one thing for me to be out of the house, but then I was at college, so they were still kind of paying my phone bill and insurance and stuff like that. So they were kind of like, you can obviously be your own person, but you kind of got to stay within the framework of what we taught you until we are no longer paying anything for you. So there was one time where I just felt awful about this, but one of their things was like no tattoos. And so I went out and got a tattoo, and I just felt so bad about it. And it was a quote that my grandfather said, "There but for the grace of God go I." So it's like they couldn't be that mad at me. But it was just one of those things where we had like a conversation, and I wrote them this like lengthy letter. I'm so sorry. I know I'm still under that respect, and I broke that this time, and because they were still paying for some things of mine. So that was kind of the rules. And I'm like a big rule person. Like everything is very black and white. And so obviously I did this, and I felt bad about it, and we made that right. And then moving forward, we were good, but it was just a thing. But that was kind of my framework, was that even though I'm not in the house, like, look, they're still paying my car insurance, they're still paying my phone bill. So I mean, there's some things where I'm still under their authority somewhat.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think you guys have kind of answered it. The way that I think we have to view parenting, not to get too like deep into the theology of parenting, but on this question, but the way that I see parenting is parents kind of stand for young children. They kind of stand in the place of God in terms of authority. In other words, we learn how to, as children, respect, honor, and obey God by how we do that with our parents. And that's what it's supposed to be. And so, one of the best things that I read last week when studying for the sermon is that, like, obeying your parents and honoring your parents is kind of like training wheels on a bike. And one preacher said that training wheels was never the end game. Learning to ride a bike was. And so living under your parents and learning how to honor, obey, and fear them is like the training wheel period. So that when you move out, you now are equipped to obey God because you've learned and valued the importance of obeying your parents when you were young. And so it's kind of like that to me. And so to specifically answer your question, I kind of think it is when you move out, but I also think I would go a step further to where, like you said, when you're like independent.
Right.
And so, because when you're still depending on your parents for everything, it's kind of like you have a right to, you know, kind of demand certain things. If you're going to be investing your time, money, resources into it, your kids need to be kind of submitting, not to everything. Like if you're 20 years old and you're living at your parents' house, I don't know if like curfews and stuff like that are as important to obey, but the overall philosophy and the overall kind of structure needs to be an attitude of submission if you're still like living in your parents' house or they're still paying some of your bills and things like that. And when you completely break that and become independent on your own, I think some of those rules can change, but I don't think the commandments of honor should change. And even the fear, respect, a healthy respect. I think those things carry with us until our parents, until, you know, they pass away.
What part about being last? Y'all took all the good points away. But with mom, you know, like, because she was, you know, I had grandparents, I had a grandpa that you didn't dare cross. He was very, very old school. You know, honoring them was always a big thing to me, even as the older brother. You know, I, in some aspects, had to be like a parent because it's like, I tell my little brothers, you're not going to talk to mom, you're not going to treat her that way. You know, I had to fill in those spots, but I realized what I truly had. And sometimes you don't always know that because used to, I mean, I started working when I was 14. I mean, you know, because of just mom, so had to fill in the areas there to help and stuff. And I can remember one specific time that I was like 16 and we were working in a factory. We worked different shifts and mom come and hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. And of course, all the guys just gave me a hard time. Oh, you're a mama's boy. And like, I'm not a mama's boy. And like the very next week, I heard about a guy, a teenager got killed in a car accident and it hit home to me. And after that, I don't care what anybody said. I'm going to show my mom. I'm going to love her. I don't care what all the guys say. But fast forwarding way on down about honor and respect, I had kids. We went home to see mom. And like I said, mom's about 5'7", 125 pounds, wringing wet. I mean, she wasn't very big at all. But we were picking and so forth. And she said, I'll just bend you on my knee. I said, Mom, I'm a lot bigger and a lot stronger. And she pointed out, she said, I'm still your mother. I said, yes, ma'am. And I know she was picking, but I always wanted to honor her. As we got older, I mean, at times she's like, oh, you never done anything wrong. It's like, I remember a whole lot of times I got took to the woodshed, many, many times that she forgot about. I didn't enjoy it, but she taught me to obey. And she used discipline in the right way, but she also taught me to honor her. And I'm glad I was able to do that because I can't do it now. I can't do it now in the sense that I try to live my life knowing what she wanted me to live.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of the woodshed, what a great segue into the next topic of discussion. The kind of question, and I want to like work in discipline here. How do you teach children to obey from the heart rather than just a trembling fear? Like, I'm afraid. Every decision is questioned, and you want kids to make good decisions because they love you and love God, and God wants us to make good decisions out of our love for Him. So how do we teach them? We'll go this way just to.
Okay.
Sorry, Pastor Bailey. So you can get the first good thing. But what would you say? And then let's talk about like, you know, a healthy, maybe discipline. Some parents might not spank, but it's not necessarily a horrible thing either, in my opinion.
I mean, having twins was a challenge because we wanted to, but we never planned on two at one time. You know, when early you spank, you know, pop their bottoms or whatever, you know, when they're disobedient or whatever. But as they got older, even though they were twins and so forth, I had to treat them different because they were different people. I'm giving specifics. Joshua, I could just look at him or raise my voice, not yell, but I could raise my voice and he would break. Joseph was completely opposite. He was a little bit more determined. He had to think and process. And so, you know, one time I said, well, you treat me different than you do my brother. Because they still call each other brother if you remember my boys. I said, yeah, I do. I knew it. I knew it. I said, because you're not the same person. Even though you're twins, I had to figure out how to treat Joseph in a way that would get through to him and treat Josh in a way that would get through to him. The thing I hated, and I always tried to say this, not that this hurts me more than it hurts you, because kids never understand that. I may have said that before. But I said, I hate doing this, but I do it spanking, and we believe in spanking, not abusing, but spanking. I said, I hate doing it, but I do it because I love you. Now, they didn't understand it then, but I think they do now. And it's like a heart issue, is knowing that you're doing it not out of anger, not out of revenge or whatever, get back at you for embarrassing me or whatever, but I always try to do what I love. Now, I'm not saying that every time I did it was out of love, but I try to show them that I got to do this because I love you too much to let you continue to do what you're doing. Hopefully that gets to the heart of the issue, which is what drives us all to do the bad things we do.
I think that's really good. And I would just say, I would add to when you discipline your kids, because when I was growing up, I got spanked. My parents believed in the belt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they used to spank me. Not going to lie, I got a lot of those. I'm still a little bitter because I don't remember my sister ever getting spanked. But I got spanked quite frequently. And I remember specifically, though, here's the difference. Like, here's why I think people think that type of discipline so wrong today. And I'm not advocating one way or the other. My point is, that's how I was raised. I grew up respecting authority, not really having an issue with that. And I love my parents, and we have a great relationship today. So there is a healthy way to discipline your kids in this way. Okay. And so they would always just like talk to me beforehand. And I think that's what, to answer your question about getting to the heart, they would talk to me beforehand. And I don't remember them ever like spanking me or disciplining me out of just pure anger and frustration. Like, even I remember a lot of times, most of my spankings happened well after the incident.
Mm.
And I think that allowed a lot of like tension to calm down, and it allowed a lot of us to process and realize right from wrong, for me to realize some things, and for them to realize some things. Now, I'm not going to lie. I a lot of times thought the length of time would be like, okay, I got out of this one, and then it still got me. But here's why I think that was healthy. It did get to my heart. And I think that's the most important thing, because you're trying to tug at the kid's heart. But then here's what I want you to know, and this is where a lot of kids go wrong. They think that they can do really bad things, say I'm sorry, and get out of consequences. And what I learned was, when I was wrong, we had conversations about it, and I still had a consequence. So it taught me that a choice always leads to a consequence. And so, like, you can say you're sorry all day long, but we know in life a bad choice still has consequences. And that's what discipline, healthy discipline, taught me, and it got to my heart. I also think the gospel connection's important. And parents, like, they might not feel like they're adequate enough to really communicate and teach the gospel to their children, but I think you need to insert gospel into those conversations with your children. And I think that will help you kind of get to the heart behind getting them to obey and getting them to do these things and stuff like that. So, and last thing, because I do want to move on, but I will say to parents of young children, young kids don't realize it when they're real little. So you are kind of teaching them, there needs to be a healthy fear of mom and dad. There does. And that's okay if you feel that way when they're young and stuff. And so I think that evolves as it gets older. But when they're young, they need to kind of fear that if they write on the wall, or if they, hit someone or tell somebody no or whatever, they need a healthy dose of fear. Like, they're going to call mom and dad or whatever. That's a healthy thing. I don't think that's a bad thing, the way our culture thinks. And I think so many parents are afraid of that they've swung the pendulum to where now they just want to be buddy and friends with their kids.
Yeah.
And there's a balance between that. Like, I want my kids to like me, But I also kind of want them to be a little bit nervous when they're at school, that if I do something wrong, mom and dad's going to find out about that.
Mhm.
And there's a healthy balance.
Yeah. Well, before I share, I just want to say that my childhood has pretty much led me to this moment where I finally get to tell some details about how I was raised, because I think the statute of limitations is up. Do y'all remember those old wooden swings, really thick at all?
Like from
Yay
a tree
big.
or?
Yeah, like you know how we have the kind of plasticky ones now? Back in
yeah.
the day, they were
Mhm.
slats of wood that were like
Mhm.
inch and a quarter thick. Well, my dad got a hold of one of those, put a handle on it, sanded it smooth, and then on the backside wrote the Terminator, the Jane Family Board of Education. And that's what exclusively I got spanked with. My last spanking was at 16 years old.
Wow.
And I was like, it was just a reinforcement of, hey, you're not too old for this. So
I can't wait to see your dad after this.
I'm really excited for people to question that. No, but one thing I remember was that they always had a conversation with me about what we did, and they always said that they loved me, even though that was
Mhm.
like, hey, well, you wouldn't have done that if you loved me. You know, that you kind of have
Mhm.
that thought as
Mm.
a child, but now, like when we discipline our kids, it's out of direct disobedience or lying. And so like when Lila will hit Anthem or vice versa, that's direct disobedience, because there's like a standing rule that you don't hit your siblings and stuff like that. So there's always like reasons behind, and if it's outside of one of those things, there's a different punishment, but that's the things that we would spank for. And then also it's just having that conversation and not out of anger. And Morgan has done a really good job of like, hey, I think you need to like cool down before. Just send her to her room. She's in her room crying anyway. That's like half the punishment right there. And so it's just not doing anything. So if my heart rate's up and I'm going in there, that's not a good call, because just my like vibe is not doing that out of love. So I think that's the most important thing, is just to kind of have a cool down period and just going in there like, if she's crying, we'll just talk afterwards, but like, hey, just stand up, do this, and then we'll talk, and like, you knew this was not a good decision, right? And a lot of times she does already, because she's not a dumb child. But and Anthem's kind of learning that too. Just we've had to spank him less because he's just a different personality type than Lila, but Lila's like me, so she gets more. And for whatever reason, I can't get my parents to give me the Terminator to use on my own children. But so I don't know what they did with it, but so yeah, I'm gonna.
They
ask
got
them
it framed
about that.
somewhere.
Yeah, they do.
I would echo a lot of what you guys have said. I think like there are just so many things that are specific to all children, or that are kind of general to all children, and some other things that are specific to others. I think Dr. James Dobson said, when you're talking about discipline, you want to break their will, but not their spirit.
Right.
And so you want to get them to the point where they realize what they've done is wrong, and they're ready to move, like apologize, repent from that, and then move beyond it, but not to beat them down so much figuratively to where like they just really are so frustrated and discouraged with how you handled it. Again, and you guys said this so well. I mean, there's so many things that they don't understand now that they hopefully will later. I know Shanna and I really try to be very intentional about talking about the boundaries and expectations. You mentioned boundaries in one of the answers of our earlier questions, and those are so important. You think of boundaries like a fence, and at the very least, they do two really good things. They keep bad things out, and they keep good things in. And so what we talk about in our family is, if you stay inside this fence, these rules, we can keep you safe. All right. You go outside of that, we're going to still try to keep you safe. You're our children, but it is going to be a lot more difficult. And so I think that's where, Josh, what you're talking about, like just, you can make your choices, but you can't choose your consequences, and consequences are going to come. So we try to harp on those things and talk through a lot of stuff. And what we try to build is just that open conversation, whether it's getting in trouble somewhere else and then us having to hear about it. We try to frame it as, hey, if you tell us, it's going to go a lot better than if we hear it from someone else. Part of it is because we want to ask those questions and get to the heart. And if you're already thinking about it and you're thinking about it enough to say, I know mom and dad are going to be disappointed, but I'm going to do the hard work of telling them that I messed up in this way. That's so much better, because we feel like that's already a couple steps in the right direction of making reconciliation and doing things the right way.
You know, I just thought of something when I was like a teenager, had some freedom. I could go out and do something and know it was wrong. Now, I didn't get saved. I was 22. I'd go out and do it. And then before I could get home, mom already knew about it. She had the CSI or the FBI or somebody always, she's like, I can't even get home. And you know about it before I ever get home. So I thought of that. It's like, you know, I couldn't fool mom. Mom had the eyes in the back of her head and all the other things, but for me, it was just mom. So learned a lot from that.
One thing to kind of that helped me with perspective of how to talk to my kids, and kind of leading us into the next question, was that there were 3 C's, and I don't know who came up with this, but there's like 3 stages of life that you kind of parent your kids, and the first stage is like your toddler, child, where you're a cop, so you're always kind of just, okay, no, this is the rule, no, this is what you do, no, this is a yes, this is a no. And then the next stage is kind of like where your kids are a little grown, elementary, middle, kind of first part of high school, where you're a coach. And so you're like, hey, does this make sense to you? Like, this is the rule, kind of having more conversational. And then kind of your young adult phase is like where you're the consultant. And that third stage, you only interject if they come to you, because hopefully if you did the first 2 stages right, they want to talk with you about stuff. So that was kind of a cool framework, I guess, for how we talk to our children now at 7 and 3, that we're still in the cop phase, and kind of Lila's kind of inching into the coach phase, like, hey, you're not supposed to do this, right? Where you can have conversations with them. But this culture today, and I'll just say our answer to this like briefly, and then I really want to hear what y'all think, because I know times have changed, but our culture really resists authority and kind of paint authority as stupid. I think of even like back when I was growing up, the Disney dad kind of narrative, where like all the parents of these shows were kind of dumb, and the dads especially were just goofy and aloof, and then it was the real kids that knew it all and everything. And that may have had an impact in and of itself, but I feel like culture just has tried to take that narrative and like put it on steroids, and now like, oh, your parents don't know anything, police don't even know, like they're just there to make you have a horrible time and unfair, do this and that. But so our answer to this has, I guess, been homeschool, because if we're in our own bubble, and I mean a good bubble, they're not subject to the crazy theories going on. But like, what do y'all think about how to parent? Some people can't homeschool, and I get it, like that's not the answer to everyone, but what are some things, especially if you have kids like in the school system, that you could use to reinforce authority, and like also at the same time counteract kind of what they're seeing on TikTok and social media, that authority is not such a bad thing?
Who's going first?
You go first.
All right. So it's a really good question. And I think, first of all, I think every kid's a little bit different. My parents would tell you that. I've heard it kind of mentioned already in you guys' answers as well. Every kid has a little bit of a different personality. And so I think some kids, like my sister, she had just things a little bit more together. She was kind of her own person growing up. So I think that prevented her from getting in trouble a lot, because she wasn't trying to please anybody. She was just trying to go forward. Well, for me, I grew up and I was just kind of wanting to fit in. And that led me to some choices that were not pleasing to God, but also not pleasing to my family. So I would say, with a culture that doesn't like authority, and how do you instill that in your kids? I think that a lot of it for parents starts with how you personally talk about the kids' authorities in their life. So like when they're little, they're going to come home, because home is where they're the most themselves. And they're going to come home and they're going to talk about people like a teacher and coaches and different things. And they're going to say things because they're kids. They're going to say, man, I didn't get in the game because whatever. That coach doesn't like me, or that coach is out to get me, or whatever. Or a teacher, it's like, man, I can't stand it. They don't know what they're doing. They don't whatever. And one thing my parents did when I was young is they never allowed me to say anything bad about my authority. So like they would kind of nip the thing in the bud and make sure that even if I was complaining about them, that I complained in the right way without dishonoring who God's appointed over me. And growing up, like I got in trouble a lot, got sent to the principal's office all the time, and they never took my side. But when I got older, I asked them, and they told me something really good. I was joking with them. I was probably in college at this point, and I asked my mom. I said, "Mom, can I ask you a question?" I said, "I got sent to the principal's office all the time, and you guys got called to the school all the time to meet with my teachers, to meet with different people or whatever. And every single time you took their time, I can't remember one time you took your son's side. Why? Like, what in the world?" And my mom told me, she gave me some insight. She said, "Josh," she said, "we wanted to teach you that even if your authority is kind of not maybe leading the classroom or leading things the right way, you still respected and honored them, because when you get into the work world, you might work for a boss that doesn't run his organization the right way." Now, if he's doing something that is directly violating scripture, that's a whole nother conversation. But if he's just kind of like implemented a rule that you don't care for, it's kind of like, how are you going to handle that? They wanted to teach me something. And she went on to say this. She said, "Josh, you know how many side meetings we had with your teachers and your authorities that you knew nothing about, where we looked them in the eye and said, you were wrong," to your teacher? And I do nothing about it, because they wanted to teach me that that was not my place to dishonor them. But my parents behind closed doors were fighting for me every step of the way. And I think that was the right balance, because what we do in our culture, a lot of times your kids get mad about authority. What do we do as parents? Like, well, you're dead right. Your teacher is this. Your teacher did. And we buy into the narrative. And guess what we do? We take that narrative to their friends' parents, and we take it around here. And next thing you know, everybody feels a certain way about an authority figure, all because we laid down our responsibility to teach our kids how to properly honor and respect. And that's why school systems are in disarray today. It's because parents have forsaken their right to teach kids how to properly respect authority. And that's why teachers are leaving school systems left and right. It's not because the students are the problem. It's not because teachers are the problem. It's because parents forfeited their rights to teach their children how to respect authority. And that's my thing. And so I think it's all in the way that we talk to our kids about their authority and how we let them vent to us. And we need to make sure that that's in a honoring way.
Yeah. I remember one story. My boys were, I think, juniors, sophomores or juniors. One of them come, and I won't mention who it was, come in. He was just mad. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "That coach don't know what he's doing." He said, "All we ever do is run. We don't even hardly touch a ball. We just running, running, running." And I said, "Son," I said, "you may not understand it, but he's trying to train you and teach you something that you need. You may not understand it." Well, that year they went on to win the state championship. I said, "You remember when you complained about me?" And he said he was going to quit. I said, "No, you're not quitting." I said, "You start something, you're going to finish it." I said, "You're not quitting." I said, "You remember when you were wanting to quit?" And I said, "Now, when it come down to the end, when you were in overtime, triple overtime and all that," I said, "Coach was teaching you something a long time ago." And I said, "People in your life," I don't remember exactly how, I said, "they are doing things to help you, not to hurt you." But when you're a kid, you think, "Well, everybody's against me." Well, no, they're going against your flesh, because your flesh says, "Give me what I want." You don't need what you want. We don't give our flesh everything we want. That's why another reason why the world is in such a mess. It's giving you something that you needed, even though you didn't think you needed it, you still needed it. And I think that's part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I love what you guys have said. There's always going to be authority in our lives, and so the way that we respond to our parents, Josh, like you talked about, as we're very young, it's our parents who kind of stand in the gap for us and teach us what it's like to obey and respect and honor ultimately God. And then we continue just to kind of point them that way, and to go along what you said too. We're coaching them and we're consulting them to continue to do the same thing as they get up. But you're always going to have authority figure, and there's ways to disagree with people without being disagreeable. I mean, there's ways that keep you from being insufferable to be with or get along with as a boss or even as an employee, to make sure that you're handling things the right way, especially when it comes down to having your Christian testimony and your witness. I mean, that goes a long way too. If people, that kind of comes along with the territory of handling your business to where they can see that and say, well, they are different because of who they claim to follow, talking about Jesus.
Yeah, you don't outgrow authority.
Right.
No.
You never get to the point where you don't have authority figures. In fact, I would say in some ways, like as you get older, you're more accountable to more people the older you get and the further you go in life than sometimes you are as a child. And I think that's good to teach your kids that. I mean, I pastor a church and I'm the president of our Christian school. You would think I can do whatever I want. I'm more accountable to more people today than I've ever been. And I think it's important that we teach children that that's life and that that's what it is. And so if they don't learn to respect and honor the first God ordained institution, which is parents over a kid, then they're really going to struggle when they get into the work world, because they're going to be told, hey, this is how you dress to come to our company. And they're going to not like that. And what are they going to do? Just go find another job or go do whatever. It's kind of like we need to teach them how to submit to some of those boundaries, like David said earlier. And also just to communicate, boundaries are good.
Yeah.
Boundaries are healthy. Boundaries are there to protect and guide us. And it's important not to look at boundaries as the problem.
Yeah.
So
That's good. That was kind of everything, and we're right at our time, maybe a little more, but this was a kind of a good episode to get like multiple perspectives on, I think.
can I add one thing?
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of just practically real quick. It's interesting. We got us all here or whatever, and we have a lot of listeners who are probably, different stages of parenting. And so let's do this. David's in an interesting spot. I'd love for him to give just one brief parenting tip to parents who are parenting college age students.
Okay.
I want you to give one parenting tip on parenting, kind of that, since you have like a toddler-ish. Anthem is 3, right?
Mhm.
And so that age range, I'll do elementary, and then Pastor Bailey, just because he's the oldest, right? if you didn't know this,
I know you couldn't tell that. I mean,
Yep. And you do how to parent your adult grown children that are now building their own families. What does that look like? So we'll start right here.
Yeah, I'll first say, and it's more of a general statement to begin with, but parenting is hard. It's hard and it's difficult, but it's so worth it. And so hang in there, for even if you don't see the rewards necessarily, like they'll eventually will be there. But part of that too is the idea that maybe can kind of help guide us again in general for now, is that discipline is discipleship. And so to kind of let things kind of be filtered through that, so you can remember that, hey, this tough conversation or the way that I feel, because I don't want to approach this and nip this in the bud, so to speak, but knowing that I need to is such a good reminder when you think about discipline being a big part of discipleship. But I would say those are general things, but then specifically towards college students, that even in itself is tough, because I view my older kids still as the pictures that pop up on my phone, the really, really younger kids that you think about. But that's our goal. Our goal is to get them to know what authority is, know how to respect it, know how to obey and submit to it, and then let them become their own person and make their own decisions. And we can only protect them for so long, and then they knowing that they are their own person. And so allowing them the freedom while they're in, again, the safe environment of your home, to make those decisions, to understand what it's like to deal with the consequences, even when they're obviously consequences aren't great, but to learn from that. So just kind of let them sit in that safe spot.
One thing I've heard is that problems don't really go away. Like you'd hope that you can deal with some stuff and then with a girl and then not have to worry about it when they get older. And same for a boy, but they only get more complex as they get older. So the biggest thing that I guess I've learned parenting for like this toddler age is just consistency, because the from 0 to 5 is like a super important time to really lay out the boundaries. And if you let one thing slide this time and then you just ream them for something else this other time and it's really the same thing, then they're like, what, the boundary's confusing for them, especially as like a 2 and 3 year old. They're like, wait, I got in trouble for this once. And then kind of if you have a pattern of inconsistency, you can get into like them testing your boundaries instead of you laying down yours. So that would be the most important thing, I think. And they'd be different for each family, each child. Hopefully, you don't have one rule for one kid that you let the other one do, because that's inconsistent, and we want to be consistent as parents. But really, just it's the most work. I feel. I mean, for me, it's really hard because you want to. Okay, whatever. But if you say something one time, they should do that thing after the first time. And then if you're on time 2 and 3, and there's not really a punishment happening, that's inconsistent, and it's hard, and it might be like you might feel like you're just nagging and nagging and nagging, but you'd rather nag a 3, 4, and 5 year old than a 16 and 17 year old who are about to go into the world and make their own decisions.
Wish we had started over here, because the number one thing I was going to say for my age was consistency. So I'm going to go to my second thing. I would say this is simple, but if you have kids, so I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, and a lot of times they're in these emotional states right now in a lot of ways. And so for us, I really am trying to teach them, relax. Just relax. And that sounds very simplistic, but like, I know you get intense. I know your emotions are going nuts about whatever it is in life. Hey, take a breath and let's communicate in a calm way. Because I don't think it's healthy for us just to teach our kids that the way to properly communicate with their sibling or with their parent or with a friend is just to lose your mind. And right now we're kind of in that emotional state. So a lot of times you're freaking out. And so your natural tendency is tones getting loud and your voice is going nuts and you're getting frustrated. Hey, take a breath and let's calm down and let's learn to communicate in a more relaxed way. And then the second thing is just time. Discipline takes time. I referenced that on Sunday. It takes time. And sometimes when you're running out the door and disrespect happens, you need to stop for just a minute. And if you're 5 minutes late to whatever you're going to, in the long run, it's worth it to take some time and to really instill that discipline and discipleship into your kids.
Yeah. Well, in my role, my twins are now 33 years old. They turned 33 in September. So, I'm more of the encourager. To me, I found when it was small, it was so much constant. But when they got older, it got harder in some aspect because you couldn't tell them what to do because they were no longer in the home. And trying to be, again, consistent is difficult because they're different people. And with us, with twins, everybody thought, oh, you do them the same way. Well, no. They're different. Just like all yours are different, but everybody thought, oh, the twins, they're just the same. No, different as day and night. And still using that same mentality to what I could say, well, one wouldn't work on the other, and trying to just help and guide and direct, and not it's like, oh, I want to tell them what to do so bad. Unfortunately, sometimes like, okay, you're going to have to learn the hard way, like I had to in some aspects, to always say, no matter what, they have disappointed me just like we've all disappointed our parents. My love never changes. My love is always going to be there for you. Even though I don't agree with what you're doing or whatever, I'm always going to love you. So being that loving parent, I told them, I said, growing up without a dad, I never heard my dad say, I love you. I tell my boys multiple times throughout the day, if I talk to them, we end the conversation, hug and I love you. I tried to instill something I didn't have. And yet, with their mom and so forth, lovingly try to guide them through these difficult things. I don't know about y'all, but my boys will call me, it's like, they'll ask me a question like, how you think I know that? I wished I did know everything that you thought I knew. But I appreciate that they're coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I always want to be there, but I still have to be their dad. Even though I want to be their friend, and we are friends, we work out together every week. We're there, but I still want to be a good example before them. And now I have to say, I can't say, you can't say that. I say, well, that's probably not the right thing to say. So you change the way you talk to them.
Mm. I want to add one thing to what I said. Another good thing to do, like with in regards to young children, having a fun relationship with them too. One thing that I remember a pastor saying is that when you want your kids to be with you when they're young, they'll want to be with you when you're old. So having that relationship with them, and then also like having the kind of relationship where so they'll listen to you, but also like because they respect you and have fun with you, and that is something that I've had to learn the last few years. Like if I don't spend time with my kids outside of getting home and the standard like okay, eat, go to bed, now do all this, and like if I don't play with them, then I kind of lose some capital with them when I ask them to do something because they respect me because they have fun with me. And that seems kind of silly, and but that's something that Morgan has really shared with me, that's like she has a great relationship with her dad. He's passed now, but like just she was like, I remember him all the time playing with me in the floor, and just always being with him, and that is like a relationship that I want to have with my kids. So
Yeah.
if I could go back and add that on top of what I said. But does anyone else have any kind of last minute things? Cool. So that was good. A very practical episode today for sure. And everyone can learn something from it, even if you don't have kids. Don't forget to email in any questions you might have or topics you want us to talk about at djane@ugbconline.com. There's also a page on the website, a form you can fill out, and that gets right to us that way as well. I'll link that. But see y'all next week. Thanks for tuning in today.